From the Centre for European Reform, this is the CER podcast.
Posons-nous sérieusement la question de l'avenir que nous voulons et ayons tous ensemble le courage de le construire.
Für uns in Deutschland ist das Bekenntnis zum vereinten Europa Teil unserer Staatsräson.
A strong united Europe is a necessity for the world because an integrated Europe remains vital to our international order.
This is the moment for Europe to lead the way towards a new vitality.
Hello and welcome to this week's CER podcast. My name is Sam Lowe. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for European Reform based in London, and I'm very happy to be joined today by Elisabetta Cornago, who's our new Research Fellow focusing on climate and the economics of climate adaptation and the like. Elisabetta, hello.
Hi, Sam. Very nice to be here and nice to join you on this podcast.
How are you?
I'm all good. Weather in Brussels is not as great, but that's what you get.
Great. Yes. Yeah. It's very changeable here in London. It's rain, hail, then sun, all in the space of about 20 minutes. But enough of the weather. So Elisabetta, you joined the CER recently. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you're interested in?
Sure. As you can hear from my accent, I'm Italian, but I've now left Italy, I would say a bit more than 12 years ago, in fact, I think, to finish up my studies here in Brussels. In fact, I did a PhD in economics, focusing on environmental and energy policy issues. So that kind of interest, has been there for a while. After finishing my studies, I moved to Paris to work at the OECD on again environmental policy questions. A pretty broad range from urban policy for transport to behavioral insights for more effective policies. And more recently, I worked also at the International Energy Agency on energy efficiency and other things like that. So I'd say it's been a while now for me to work on topics related to climate change mitigation, covering everything from transport to buildings to other things in between.
Great, and we're very, very privileged to have you working with us now. And this week you published your first piece called "How to Decarbonise EU Road Transport Without Summoning the Gilets Jaunes," which is quite a fun title. I like the use of the word summoning. It's
exactly. It's kind of trying to exercise, I guess, the threat.
Yeah, exactly. So what led you to write about road transport to begin with?
Yes, such a sexy topic, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Especially, for me, I'm like someone who, full disclosure, doesn't even own a driver's license. So I guess that's an interesting perspective. Yes. But jokes aside, so no, I think road transport is interesting, and then transport in general is an interesting sector to look at because of, let's say, the weight it has in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and because it's been a trickier sector in terms of decarbonization so far, right? And so what this means is that, in the EU, transport is in fact the largest emitter, aside from energy generation, and it accounts for over 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. And in fact, this has not been getting better, in the sense that emissions from transport are the only ones, or the only sector which has seen increasing emissions since 1990. So the trend is not going in the direction we need, right, to meet climate action targets. And so I thought, let's take a look at what we need to do to reverse this trend and try and meet what are now more ambitious climate action goals.
And you sort of mentioned that it's been very hard to deal with, it'd be hard to abate. And I suppose this is the link to the summoning of the Gilets Jaunes. Why do you think that is? Is it just because it's difficult to get right with the public, the messaging's difficult, or is it because it requires further thinking about when it comes to the mitigation of the downsides?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are several factors. So on one hand, as you say, I think it's certainly a very sensitive issue with the public, right? In the sense that I think transport mobility is a very, basic necessity we have. We need to get to work. We need to, go about town to go to school and then do our errands. And so especially in areas where public transport is not, as well organized or pervasive or really there at all as a decent option, then we need to rely on our own cars. And so any type of policy that tries to cut down emission by increasing the price of driving through, let's say, fuel taxes or carbon pricing, then that's obviously a big no politically, and that's what happened, with the Gilets jaunes in France. And on the other side, I'd say there's also the fact that, I guess because of this, the approach so far, both by the European Commission and by member states, has been to not use price signals as much to try and push forward a shift to lower carbon transport options, and rather rely on things like vehicle emission standards. So, putting down milestones for automotive manufacturers to try and get design their cars in a more and more fuel efficient way. But
this is going to change, right? And I suppose that's what you were looking at in your piece.
Exactly. So we are at a bit of a crossroads in a way, in the sense that precisely because the EU has just approved these more ambitious climate action goals for 2030 and 2050, then there needs to be then a step change also in the policies we put in place to actually meet those targets. And I would say, most important step change seems to be that the Commission is suggesting to expand carbon pricing to cover road transport. What does this mean? It means that, while so far there was not such a clear price signal on the emissions that we cause when we drive our car or our moped and so on, this is going to change if this proposal, which is going to be tabled over the summer, is indeed approved by the member states and Parliament. But of course, what this means is that there is going to be an increase, right, in the cost of driving. And so how to get that right? Because on one hand, from the economic point of view, it makes sense to have the polluters pay and to put a clear price signal on the pollution that one causes while driving. But on the other hand, as we said, from the social point of view, from the political point of view, it is very difficult. And it's important to design this type of policy in a way that it doesn't hurt vulnerable households, particularly in areas where driving really is the only option to go about.
How do you even go about extending carbon pricing to transport? I mean, I suppose the obvious way is you just tax gasoline a lot. But I don't think that's the proposal here, is it? We're thinking about extending the emissions trading scheme.
Exactly, yeah. So there are a couple of things, let's say, on the table. The main, I guess, novelty is that there's going to be again, we're talking about proposals, right? Or we're talking about pre-proposals that are being discussed before seeing them black on white. So, let's take them with a pinch of salt. But still, what the Commission has been suggesting is that they will likely create a separate emission trading scheme. So, something similar to what is currently existing in Europe, covering energy generation and heavy industry, but that covers only road transport and energy consumption associated to heating. And so what that means is that, there's going to be a separate cap on the emissions associated with road transport, and there's going to be a number of allowances allocated to this sector, and then these allowances can be traded and as such are going to have a price. And so that price is going to then ultimately hit the consumer, right? At the pump.
Yeah, but who's going to pay for this? Is it going to be the producers of the cars?
This is going to be again, from what the Commission has been setting initially, it's going to be hitting, let's say, upstream, right? So the fuel, producers and refiners. Let's say that's the touch point of the policy by design. But then eventually, the price increase is going to trickle down to the consumer.
So ultimately lands on consumers. And I suppose the fear here is that such a measure will end up being quite regressive, in that it hits poor people harder on a relative basis than those who are more well off. And going back to your reference, the Gilets jaunes reference, this could potentially fuel some sort of backlash. But you have some ideas on how to ensure that backlash doesn't happen, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I think there are ways, and in a way this thinking around how to use revenues from carbon pricing in a way that offsets the negative impact of increased prices is something that's already in place, even in the existing ETS, because in the existing ETS or emission trading system, part of the revenues are actually dedicated to a fund that helps out lower income member states to modernize their energy infrastructure. And so I'm thinking of something similar that could be done with revenues from this new road transport related carbon pricing system. So we could envisage the creation of a fund that transfers part of these revenues to, again, lower income member states or perhaps regions to be a bit more targeted, to support the investment in low carbon transport infrastructure. So think, networks of chargers for electric vehicles, think bike lanes, think also potentially incentive schemes to support the replacement of fuel inefficient cars with more efficient ones. So that could be one way, and that sees, I would say, a transfer towards, as I said, lower income regions. But another way would be to create some kind of carbon dividend transfer, as has been done in other countries like Canada, for example, targeting more specifically lower income households. And so this would be a check, basically, right? That a set of households that can be defined with respect to income, with income definitions, receive as income support, because they are going to be bearing a disproportionate burden of the increase in fuel prices. So these are,
and these checks could be signed by whoever the energy commissioner is at the time or something.
Yeah, whoever wants to take the merit of the check,
whoever
right?
wants to take the political credit for delivering it. I suppose because understandably you've been focusing on what the EU can do in this area, but it's one of those areas where I think there are going to be hard limits on what the EU can do as an institution to offset any regressive implications associated with this policy of introducing carbon pricing to transport. In that, I wonder if there's also going to have to be a coordinating function to ensure that member states also have another look at their own taxation system to see if that can help offset the sort of tax burden more generally.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's exactly another one of the measures that are on the table. So the Commission is planning to revise the current energy taxation directive, and that covers, it's a bit broader, right, than road transport. It covers everything from electricity to heating fuel taxation to transport, fuel taxation. And so with respect to these type of changes, I think there's going to be a negotiation to try and get then the overall level of these price increases right, not to be too burdensome at the pump. And so there needs to be a coordination between, as you said, the carbon price, which is going to derive from an EU level policy, this new ETS that applies to road transport, and the national policy like fuel taxes, which are in fact today very different across the European member states, as well as across types of fuels, as well as between also, households and industry. They face different taxation levels as well as different prices. So in fact, one of the aims of this reform is to try and harmonize a bit more tax levels, whatever that means. That's a bit of a, vague statement, I guess.
Seems like the word harmonization and tax policy in an EU context.
Exactly.
start to shiver.
Exactly. But at the same time, I think one point that's going to be, on paper, an easy win, politically perhaps a bit tougher to work out, is the removal of hidden or not so hidden fossil fuel subsidies, right? Which are nested here and there in the various national fiscal systems. And that's basically removing those lower fuel tax rates, which are nicely granted to certain sectors, from agriculture to other, specific sectors of the economy that have managed to reap these nice discounts, basically on the final fuel price. So those things basically have to go. If the polluter has to pay, right? Because this is ultimately the rationale of putting in carbon prices and
And I suppose that's the big question, isn't it? So the EU is, introducing carbon pricing probably to the road transport sector. Is it going to work? Are you optimistic? Do you think this is going to be a successful initiative when it comes to carbon reduction? Do you think they're going to manage the backlash, and it's going to lead to a greener tomorrow?
That's a very good question, especially as it includes optimism, on which I don't know. I guess mixed feelings. So it could work if, as I said, if upfront, when the proposal is tabled, there is a discussion around how revenues are going to be used, because carbon pricing per se can be regressive, but if it's designed in a decent way, building upon suggestions like the ones I'm proposing here, it can, on the other hand, be a progressive tool. So if presented like that and if thought through like that, I think it could work out. At the same time, this is a very delicate moment for the entire European economy. And so thinking about increasing the price of fuel at the pump is not exactly the most exciting, I guess, policy venture that
it's quite exciting. I'm not sure of its popularity.
Yes, exactly. No, you are right. And so, let's say from the acceptability perspective, I definitely see but the concern, but I think it's a challenge that needs to be met ultimately, because the sector has not been doing its homework so far, and if we want to meet our climate targets, then there needs to be a serious discussion about the role of road transport. But with that, I think the EU and member states shouldn't only think about carbon pricing, and ultimately also the reason why this type of thing is regressive is because if people have no alternative to driving, then they just have to pay a higher price. So another way to make this type of policy more progressive is to actually provide alternatives to people, and the way you do that is by investing in clean transport options. And so that's also a good moment.
This was some of the feedback I saw on Twitter to your piece, which was some people saying, yes, this is good, but also the sectors affected are going to need a lot of money to help them adapt. And some of this might be special pleading from some of those sectors, but I think what you're saying here is that more investment is needed. Sure.
And so I agree with you. What type of investment are we talking about? I can see the role of public investment in networks. So again, that's from let's say charging stations to public transport, strengthening railways. When it comes to supporting the automotive sector in making the leap towards electrification, that might be a bit, again, more difficult politically, but there has to be a discussion.
Yeah. Okay, great. So what I've got from you on this is as ever, not an easy solution, but there's some conditional optimism that it could be effective and it could work so long as the policy is designed correctly. Is that a fair summary?
That is a fair summary. I guess it's a bit, the story of policy in general. Yeah, design is everything. Policy. Yes, but it's a fair summary.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam.
So thank you. And for people listening, if they haven't read the piece, they can find it on our website, and I would very much recommend having a look. Before we go, there's just one more thing I wanted to ask you, and I know this is something you're going to be writing about in the future. What's going on with the carbon price in Europe at the moment? Because, I sort of pay very little attention, but occasionally have a look. And it seems to me that carbon suddenly got much more expensive.
Yes, that's exactly the case. So the price of carbon allowances on this EU ETS, this European Emission Trading Scheme I was mentioning a while ago, has been reaching 50 euros per ton. And that's really unprecedented. And it's been a very fast increase. It's basically doubled with respect to 6 months ago. And it's really, unprecedented also in the sense that since this emission trading system was put in place, prices were really not that much of a worry, I guess, for the sectors that the system covers, which are energy generation and some heavy manufacturing sectors like cement, steel, and chemicals. Why is that? Because they were very, very low, embarrassingly low, in fact, for a long while. And the reason that was the case is because the number of allowances on the market basically was way too high, and that led to reforms of the system. So these reforms, partly worked in the sense that now the number of allowances on the market reflects a bit better the emissions that are actually coming out of these sectors. But at the same time, what has prompted these price hike really is the reaction of market actors ultimately to the recent announcements in terms of new, more ambitious climate action targets. So things are getting real, I guess. That's what the markets are perceiving. 2030 is really fairly close. 2050, is not that far either. And we're talking about net zero carbon emissions by that horizon. And so if that's serious, and it seems to be the case, given that there has now been agreement on these objectives, then we are going towards a tighter cap on emissions, and a tighter cap means higher carbon pricing. So that brings us here.
And I imagine the politics of that gets slightly tricky. I've seen increased calls for something that I work on, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, as a result. But you're going to be writing about this in future, and I look forward to reading it. Thank you very much for participating in your first CER podcast. I hope it was a pleasant experience.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Sam.
Wonderful. And we will see or talk to everyone again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the CER podcast. If you have any feedback for us or want to leave suggestions for a future episode, then you can find us on Twitter at CER_EU.